Okay, no other points related with stakeholder engagement or dissemination, communication activities? If not, then we are going to have this stakeholders engagement. We have two very special stakeholders with us who are members of our stakeholder advisory board and who have been participating to the whole meeting and who have been preparing now a short presentation to give their point of view, their reflection on what we are doing. Ivan was already there last year, so he can even say something on the progress. Peter is a newcomer. It's first time he's part of our meeting, but I think it was very interesting and fruitful last year to have this final discussion. So I'm really looking forward for your input. So I think, I don't know whether there is any specific order between the two of you. Did you decide on anything?
Just wheat and potato, whatever you want to start with.
Oh, potato at once then. So I need to find. Yes. So you get the magic pointer. It's here.
Okay, so first of all, I think I would very much like to thank Philippe and probably the executive committee for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to interact with all of you. And then for this session, I was asked to give some impressions about what I've listened to over these 2 days and some recommendations. So the presentation, I don't know if there's much of a presentation. I just pulled together some ideas on these slides. And my first impression is that, yeah, it's a huge project with a lot of partners. So my first idea was, oh, that must be a problem. So what I would say to that for you guys is to think of it as an opportunity. Right? There might be a cost of transaction of having so many people involved, but it's actually also a huge opportunity to get knowledge from a lot of institutions, a lot of expertise from other people. So that's definitely an impression. And 25 organizations in one project, and other European projects have even more participating organizations. So that is an opportunity. Then my question, I put some more than also my impressions. I don't know how much that can actually help you who are experts in many different areas. So rather than giving some specific recommendations, I put some questions up there. And one is related to the ambition of getting practices or approaches out to the stakeholders or farmers. How much can you actually get out to farmers in 5 years? Something that is commercially available or can actually be taken on from the project by other stakeholders. If you have stakeholder involvement and there's other stakeholders that are interested in what you're doing and the approaches and technologies you're developing, will it be available for them? I think that is ambitious to think that you can have results in 5 years available to farmers. So just to have I think as you develop your research, it's I think later on I also have a comment saying that it's approaches and knowledge you're developing, not necessarily a practice that will be commercially available or to stakeholders very soon after the project. Then a comment about the project's idea of having contrasting crops. I also think that's a question you can ask, is it an attractive theoretical approach, or is it a real opportunity for scenario analysis? how much can you actually take from one crop to another. But I think actually the project is very valuable in that sense, that we are not only looking at what you can do in wheat or in potato. You're developing some approaches that you can take on to other crops. So, and there are other, so far you've mainly been talking about the tuber crop versus cereal crop, or crops spread out at different areas in Europe. But I think there's also a great issue of, an interesting issue of a low investment crop versus a high investment crop, which makes the possibilities of adoption of practices and technologies very different. If you have a high investment crop, the farmers are more likely to adopt something that has a lower effect on yield increase, for example, if there's it's a high value crop. So there's some information there that's interesting when you have these contrasting crops. Then I actually, the discussion we just had now started off with Nikki's presentation about stakeholder involvement, was something that I had thought quite a bit about. So I wanted to show you this equation that some potato guys in the Netherlands presented in a paper some time back, but also it's something that social science are involved with. And it's not only a question of having the genotype by environment, but you're also here talking about management. But then I wanted to bring in also society's requirements for how our production systems produce and perform. So it's very much dependent on what requirements the society gives to farmers or other stakeholders in an agricultural system to see how efficient it is. For example, if our microbial inoculants, they have, you can get credit, or it might be even subsidized, or it might be that they will put high taxes on nitrogen fertilizer. So the system can be changed very much according to political or society requirements to what you're producing. So what you're doing now is the stakeholders or the farmers should also realize that what we're studying now is something to make us more resilient in the future. And there might be, it's uncertain what's going to happen in the future, but the idea is to have something that is, in a context of thinking that we will have less access to resources in the future. And so the efficiency of what we're developing now is dependent on a lot of societal factors also, if it can be adopted or not. Then just this also a comment about, I think it's difficult to take on farmers' opinions early on in the project, but I think it's important that you do so. And this is also about stakeholder involvement. But the research shouldn't be just a sequential process of a phase of doing something and then doing something after that. So when you're looking at a 5-year EU project trying to do a lot of things, ambitious development in 5 years, look at it as an opportunity of you have to do an iterative process of getting things done in 5 years. So instead of thinking of we need to finish this first before we can go to the next step, a project like this I think should have these feedback loops and iterative processes of being able to take on adjustments with the research as you go along, and listen to farmers from the beginning. And then I wanted to mention, when you've been talking about stakeholders, you mostly talk about farmers, but then there's actually also a lot of other stakeholders in a value chain. So the farmers are actually the ones that decide the most if a technology should be adopted or not. There's the consumers of what is produced, the politicians. In potato, that's very much the processing companies that decide which varieties can go into a system. So I think maybe here just a comment is that there's a lot of other stakeholders out there, not only the farmers. Yeah, and then in that context, I think when I, as a representative from institutions or stakeholders outside of Europe, I think these type of European projects also have a lot of, they can have a lot of impact as awareness in a research, certain research issues and themes that can guide also research projects in other areas. So communication is very important. And there I wanted to mention that it's not only scientific publications or farmer training, or I think there's also an importance of, as you have mentioned, policy briefs, but also to get some information out to the general public about what you're doing. I think this project is very interesting for the general public. It has it's attractive. You can get regular journalists write about this or put it in their radio, TV program also, not only by social media. So just to mention that, I'm glad that you had a lot of talk about communication, even doing videos. It is important. Then I have a mention there also about the rights to use the innovations. I had a feeling, bear over with me if I'm wrong, but I had the idea that maybe it's not completely clear who will actually have the right to use the products from this project. Is it clear who will have the right to use the varieties or the inoculants after the project? Will it be available to other stakeholders? Or is it only the companies involved in the project that can do this? Or can it be taken on by other stakeholders? And then I was just thinking maybe that should be discussed and planned right from a project start, instead of getting into considerations at the end of the project where you've developed a lot of excellent stuff, but then you can't agree on who can actually have the right to use this. Then I'll go into some more potato-specific recommendations just shortly. About the seed availability, I would just mention that as a potato guy, researcher, in potato it's very important to have seed, and when I'm talking about tuber seed, that the seed is of its homogeneous quality. You can have different health quality, physiology, and also the time you've stored it. There's a lot of difference between seed quality. If the seed quality is not the same, then you have it's not homogeneous in your experimentation. So what we normally do to have seed availability is it's a different component. We always have seed production produced, available for what we are interested in researching. So it's just a comment when I listen and you have lots of good ideas and resources for studying different issues, but then you're not going to do it because you don't have the seed. I think that's a pity. So maybe there should be an investment to have seed available, and I don't know if you can even have this service by some other company, farmers or a seed company that's willing to simply just multiply your stuff and make it available for you when you need it. It might be a bit late to recommend this, but it's just a comment. Then just a comment about the reference cultivar. SIP does use, we often use Désiré. It's a potato variety which is tolerant to different temperatures, especially heat. It's also fairly new. It's not affected very much about different photo periods. It's very susceptible to late light though. But just to mention that we do use Désiré. About as a plant pathologist, talking about the pathogen effect, and maybe you shouldn't, of course, not focus on biocontrol effects, but as it is there, and you want to tease out the difference between, is it plant growth promotion or is it pathogen suppression, then what I would do would be to in any field trials register the common diseases you have in that area, and if by natural infection they affect your trials, take data on those problems, and then you can tease out between your different treatments if there's an effect from your treatments. Yeah, then I think the formulation issue and how you inoculate microbial inoculants is very important. So the way it's formulated, the way it's applied, the concentration, you can have a great effect on its efficacy. So I think it's in my mind, it's a science on its own, how you actually optimize and can commercialize these products. Also about storage life. Of course, it's different between different types of microorganisms, but it's something that cannot be ignored. Yeah, just a final comment. As I said before, I think you are. I don't have any more slides. No? There's the final comment is that you're developing approaches, knowledge, not necessarily focused on specific technologies. I think that is also important to keep in mind. So don't get too concerned about, do you have the right practice to recommend to farmers that can be commercialized and so on. I think farmers should also, when they get involved in these types of research processes, they should also be aware of maybe what we are trying out here is not outperforming what we're doing right now, but in a context of further research or in a different context of policy, subsidies, and prices of whatever, it might be economically beneficial in the future, but it isn't right now. So I think that's also something that farmers should be communicated to farmers when you start working with them in these research processes. Okay, so if there's any other questions about potato, that's actually what I mostly do. So there's any other questions? So I'm happy to answer.
Yes, please.
Peter, we have included in our project true seed of potatoes. So seed has worked on this long time ago. Do you have new initiatives oriented to this? Because in Europe we are basically talking about that. It's more, it's becoming something quite important. So we see that in the media, of course. Winter is the first actor here in Europe, but there are others. So do you have perspective of, do you have new programs oriented to boosting potato hybrids and these kinds of new technologies?
Yes, I would say that it's a hot issue also within SIP, the International Potato Center where I work. It's an issue that with true potato seed, botanical seed was a big issue in the 80s and the 90s. And then after the diversity there were in regular botanical seed, there was a drawback. And then SIP hasn't been working on it since 2000. Around that time it was more or less something that we pulled out from. But now we're actually also seeing some results from the work that was done back in the 90s today, that farmers were able to select from botanical seed families that they were introduced to certain areas, and they did their own selection after that. And now with hybrid breeding, it's not at the moment, it's not in the SIP's breeding programs, but I'm pretty convinced that it will be in the near future. And it's something that is very interesting for developing countries because of the easier dissemination or transport of seed, of botanical seed compared to seed tubers. But you ask if we have any initiatives ongoing at the moment. To my knowledge, we do not right now.
Is there any other question for Peter, or any comment on the various points raised by Peter in his presentation?
Just on the types of stakeholders to contact, we do have plans to talk to, engage with non-farmers, if you like, so other decision makers within industry and also regulatory bodies as well. So their views will be incorporated into Solid at a later stage.
Yeah, on this matter, a few years ago I was working in coordinating a small project in France on intercropping. It was with durum wheat and grain legumes, and it was in the end with the very good results, agronomic results in the field. It was pretty easy to convince the farmers of the interest of this kind of practices, but in the end, the major stakeholders that were not in favor of this were the collectors and a little bit the processors, and it failed actually to be picked up by the whole durum wheat value chain because of this major issue. The major issue was sorting the grains and the technology, and not the technology too much, but more the logistics of it for collectors. It's changing now a little bit. So newcomers and collectors are starting to consider this after another 10 years. But it shows that for a number of things we are addressing, we have been focusing a lot on farmers indeed, although sometimes the crucial step is not there only. And it seems that DG Agri is, when talking about multi-actor project, they are putting a lot of emphasis as well on farmers, although they are key players obviously in this sector, but they are not the only players. So in our project we are focusing also. We try to have a broad range of stakeholders. It's the case amongst the partners in the project, and we try to engage some others. But most of what we do with a sort of participatory approach is just with farmers, it seems to me. So maybe we should have been more clever and try to include as well other key players along the value chain. Well, it would have been certainly even more difficult, but it's certainly a very good point. You also mentioned the issue of technology transfer. So there is it's a task in work package 6, right? We haven't been really active at this point because it's a little bit early in the process of this 5-year project, and we also agree that many of the things we are trying in the project are not going to be are more, like you said at some point, approaches rather than technologies. But some of them are potential technologies, obviously, and we have an IPUDC, and we have. If we get there.
The question is if negotiations at that time also you can get to the point where it's useful for everybody. I was just wondering how much are you actually taking this into consideration now from the beginning? It can be a complicated issue.
Yes, indeed. We have a consortium agreement. But it's a good point, and it's one of the tasks in the project. So whenever we will have to deal with these issues. There is a group of people identified already, and there are general rules. Sorry? Yeah, well.
We are almost there with launching the
IPUDC, yeah. But then I think we can expect a lot from the activity, the task on technology transfer whenever we are going to move into this. Any other questions or comments? If not, I would like to thank you again, Peter, and for all your valuable comments, and well, thanks. And I hope you can make it another time in the future when we invite you to attend, to see the progress and to reflect back on what we've been doing. It's very helpful for us. So now maybe Ivan will go on with his point of view.
Well, I also like to start by thanking Philippe for inviting me again. It's great to have the opportunity to be in great Italy, enjoy wonderful food, and see many of you again after the last meeting. I start by saying I think it's a very exciting project because I think the issue of water and nitrogen, it's really, you know, we remove diseases, and if we look at agronomic management, I think those are the two key issues that will probably define yields in most of the world. So because of that, I think that what you're researching here and what you're doing here will have implications well over Europe. And I can say that for sure in the CG, there will be a lot of interest in following the developments that occur here, because you really have a top-notch scientist in a very wide range of areas. And I think when you put all of this together, you know, I'm sure something very good is going to come out of it. I think, you know, looking at how the conference is running, I think it's running very, very smoothly, well organized. I've seen all the leaders of the workshops, work packages where I've been involved. They're very effective. You know, they put action plans and they address all the questions. I think that's going really well. Perhaps my only comment would be that you may want to consider maybe and I've been in other large projects where they use a technique called carousel, where everybody talks to everybody. And I make that comment because when I was in work package 5, the first day, which was supposed to interact with other work packages, only work package 6 was present. But then I've been to other work packages where I think the interaction has been great and not a problem. So I think you may want to ask the leaders if they think that's necessary or not. Maybe not, but maybe. Okay, you know, this is addressing mostly nitrogen and water, and I think, you know, the nitrogen part by looking at the level of the stress and non-stress based on U potential, it's really good. And I would have a comment, however, on the water part, but maybe you already addressed it, and I wasn't able to participate in all the work packages, and maybe that's well worked. But at least at CIMMYT, when we evaluated a set of drought-resistant and drought-susceptible varieties, we found that root depth was the key factor explaining differences. And so we have a large discussion about which is the best screening technique: drip irrigation, pivots, furrow irrigation. And I've noticed that in some cases they're using drip irrigation here, and we're not sure that drip irrigation may be the best selection environment if we're looking for varieties that have a deep root system. No, maybe that's been discussed before and that's well addressed, but in case it is not, I think it's a worthwhile discussion. Okay, now related to work package 2, there's been a lot of discussion about seed multiplication, and I think this is something that either work package 3 or work package 5 could address. You have agronomists in those two work packages, and you have people that deal with machinery and people that deal with crop management. Perhaps they can address the seed multiplication. And I would just like to show you some data that, I think if you start multiplying the 40 genotypes this year, you should be able to have plenty of seed for everything, I believe. And I do not have experience on this with winter wheat, but I do with spring wheat. And here is an experiment where we're evaluating 2 plants per meter square, 4 plants per meter square, 8, 16, 24, 32, up to 100. And so this is at maturity, and you can see when you have in an environment where you have enough light, enough nitrogen, enough water, the wheat plant keeps producing tillers way beyond the emergence of the first node on the main tiller. And here you can find 50 tillers in one plant if it has the space, the nitrogen, and the water. So this is 2 plants that would be more or less equivalent to 1 kilogram of seed per hectare. The key thing is that it has to be equidistant. It has to be spaced to be able to leave space for the plant to produce the tillers. This is at 26 days after emergence, and this is at maturity. You can see there's a good number of tillers per plant. 4 plants per meter square, 16 plants per meter square, 24 plants per meter square. That's about 10 kilograms of seed per hectare. And we keep going, 250, that would be about 100 kilograms of seed per hectare. And these are the results of 2 years and a tall variety and a short variety. The short variety was double dwarf, so it was very short, like 70 centimeters. And you can see that with 2 plants, it's at least 1,000 to 1, more like 1,500 to 1. I know that would require a lot of work to do the space planting, but if we look at 10 kilograms of seed, that I'm sure you can adjust some type of machinery to do that type of planting. You have 700 to 1. So again, I think if you start doing that right now, you should have plenty of seed for everything, and maybe you can find somebody in work package 3 or work package 4. My only other comment would be to try to do this preferably in an irrigated environment where you don't have a lot of rainfall, because that will give you much better seed quality. Okay, so moving away from seed multiplication. In work package 5, I know they're looking at the sustainability issues, not only agronomic performance, but socioeconomic issues too. And I just wanted to bring that up, that CIMMYT is it's developed a methodology called MESMES. It's published, and the group that are doing this type of work may want to look at it and see there's maybe something that could be useful, maybe not, but it's there. Then I think this is a paper that just came out maybe less than a month ago that I think could be very helpful to the project. They call technology extrapolation domains. And it was written by people in Nebraska, Wageningen, Australia. And I think there's addresses very well the needs of the project, in the sense that They are identifying the different regions based on potential rainfall yields are determined by rainfall, temperature regimes, and PA water holding capacity. Right? And what's PA water holding capacity? It represents the capacity of soils to store water to support crop growth. The size of this water reservoir determines the degrees to which a soil can buffer against transient periods of water deficit when rainfall does not meet crop water requirements. And PA water holding capacity depends on the depth to which roots can grow as determined by soil physical and chemical properties on soil particle size. And then here, they tested the methodology or the tool in the US because there's lots of data in the US. Here, all these are different climates. The different colors represent different climates. And here, this represents the water holding capacity of the soil. And then they overlay these two variables. And here they use, I think, an interval of 25 millimeters of rain to distinguish one zone from the other. And here 50. So here you would have less zones, and here you would have more zones. And that may help you identify the areas with the different degrees of water stress, and may help you address what technologies are better suited for the different levels of stress, or what varieties may be better suited for the different levels of water stress. In fact, it may help you also identify which are the checks that you may need to be using according to the levels of climate and water stress. And they also have this tool that allows them to compare similarity of environments. And here, for instance, they're finding that Western Australia, it's similar to, Eastern Australia is similar to some environments in Argentina now. So for sure, should be able to make comparisons within Europe. Related to Work Package 5, there's already been, and I want to bring it up, although there's been plenty of discussion in Work Package 3 and already here at the end of this, in this session right now about not only the availability of seed, but are you going to be able to have varieties to test in farmers' fields that are going to perform better than what the farmer has? And if you look at these agronomic trials, some are going to be in Sweden, other ones in France, and other ones in Spain. So you're starting with 250 different genotypes. You're going to select 40 out of those, and then you're going to select 10 out of those. And I think the probabilities of finding something that is better than the commercial checks in these 3 different environments, it's very low. Maybe you'll be able to find it in one environment, but I think it's likely that you will not find something that is better than what the farmers are growing currently from those sets of 10 varieties. So I think you need to start thinking about the possibility that you may be evaluating some genotypes that will be underperforming what the farmer is using right now. So you need to start thinking about how you're going to sell that to the farmer if you want him to evaluate these materials. And just to finish on Work Package 6, I think they're doing great with all the different approaches on how to transfer information about this project to stakeholders and the public in general. But I wanted to suggest one more that we use at Summit. You basically find a scientist, and then there's this question and answer session. It's just 3 questions, so it's short and focused. And in those questions, you try to bring up issues that may be of interest to society, like what are the implications of this project for export of wheat in Europe, or for environmental benefits to Europe. And maybe you can use the information in the abstracts to develop this question and answer. We just did that about a few weeks ago at Summit, And then you send that information out, and in this case, the Washington Post, this columnist called Tamar Haspel picked it up. And this could be a message that came out of Solis. The fertilizer conundrum. Farmers pay the cost of too little nitrogen in lower yields, but society pays for too much in runoff. So farmers will opt for too much over too little. And so this is just another way of trying to get your messages out to the community. And with that, I finish. Thank you.
Any reaction? Really quiet today. Yes, Miguel.
How to sell to the farmers the cultivars that underperform with respect to the local cultivars. And I think the only way to do it is if we really manage to have a cultivar that overperform with respect to the local cultivars. Because all the cultivars we propose underperform, that would be a serious constraint and hard to justify. But if at the least we have one that overperform, we could justify the underperforming cultivars just by saying, well, we will try, but we need to make sure that we have one that is promising and can't really overperform.
But how to make sure before trying? It's a very important question. It has been discussed in the morning today, and nobody's got a solution, I think. That's also the aim of, to me, of stakeholders' engagement. We cannot promise to have the impossible, and they have farmers in this case. It's an important thing to train them in testing and using the adequate methods for doing the test and doing the evaluation in the end. But with the kind of format we have, it's just not possible to be sure that what we are going to bring is the best and the better, a better material than plant material than what is already available. We are really testing this with them. Yes, Pierre?
I think you can just be straightforward with the farmer, and like when we go with new technologies, we tend to ask the farmer, okay, give me a piece of land large enough so that you will be convinced that it works, but small enough that if it fails, you won't have a problem. And then, when you put it in those terms, it could do well, but it may not. And what's the right size so that you're happy with it?
Yeah, and also it's an important thing. It has been said before, it's a 5-year project. We are not promising to develop new genotypes except for the hybrids within this short period of time. And what we are doing is more on the longer term, trying to get better knowledge of other traits that were so far little taken into account. So we are not really promising new wheat genotypes, durum or bread wheat genotypes, but we are trying to develop a better understanding of what would be necessary and also developing approaches that might be useful on a longer term to identify better performing material under combined stress conditions. So that's something we really need to explain in the farmers' networks and to other stakeholders that we are not promising too much. We are in the process of trying to innovate, but not with the idea to produce the applicable innovation within 3, 4, 5 years. Well, maybe we will get to this for some of the innovations, for inoculants, for instance, but and also it's a good point made by Pierre. It's in work package 5 we are also looking at the combination. So we were thinking that it's nice to have among the genotypes we test some for which we expect to be good performer, and if they are very good performer, maybe they are not going to show any big response of microbial inoculants, whereas if they are not performing that well, they might show up a better response to other management innovations we are testing together with the genotypes. So we have to have all this in mind, and it's not just a genetic approach that we have. I think there was another hand. Yes, yeah. Nikki.
It's actually a question kind of for all of you. As someone who's new to the project, something that I found kind of interesting is why would a farmer get involved in this project if they're not getting paid or compensated? Like, what's actually in it for them?
Yeah, Dora.
We have a network in Hungary running since 7 years where farmers take part voluntarily and they have a genuine interest in getting information. And I was just thinking about what Miguel said. We had this issue actually in practice that all of the varieties in our meat variety lower scale tests were worse than the local control. But the farmer was not upset. In fact, it was a reassurance for him that, okay, I'm still doing the right thing. And he knew that this was a test, you know, and that it can't happen, that it will not be better than my control. So he was actually happy that he's got the information that he's not totally on the wrong track. So I don't see personally this big issue of getting farmers involved without payment or getting them into some risky situation, because if they know about the risk and they know that it's like this,
They know.
then they can decide, and then they decide it's their own decision and it's okay.
This is engagement.
Yeah, I don't know. If someone told me, oh, I'm going to film with your car, and it may make it faster, but equally it can make it much slower. So the next year, your commute to work might be like an hour longer each day. I'd say no, thanks.
I think the key issue is to target the pioneer farms, because those are the ones that are always
Yeah.
the ones like you were mentioning. We're having another project in Portugal, also very tricky. Might go wrong, and he knows that, but he's okay. He's just giving up a small piece of land, and if it goes well, he will be mentioned as the farmer that was engaged in the project, and he likes that. If it goes wrong, I mean, he will try again. He will be there for next time. So these are the farmers that we need to, because these ones will, if it goes well, they will have a huge power to influence the others, and because they're always pioneers, these are the best ones to spread the news. And if it goes wrong, well, he's always on our side. So the image won't be that bad, but hopefully it will go well. But pioneer farmers are definitely good.
But I think this is part of the concept in the networks that we have been setting up, right? Do you confirm this? Julia and
Usually, farmers that get involved in research networks usually are the innovators.
or some of them. There was a hand, yeah.
I'm not sure, but if you, instead of going for strict trials from the beginning with like 10 varieties that might perform better,
Yes?
I can just jump on that. Let's see, but I was thinking maybe it's a stupid idea. We would have to multiply material. Could we engage, it's another sort of engagement, farmers in the network to say this year we provide each network with a minimum amount of seed that you multiply. I don't know if this is workable in terms of numbers of seed. Then we get some information of what is actually working in this region for the farming.
The problem is that soil is not doesn't need to use less, so it is not adapted to very low.
Sowing by hand.
I think, I mean, farmers know, at least many farmers know, they depend on experimentation for development, and so they are open to that, and they know that experimentation means that it doesn't always succeed. So I think there are a number of farmers who find that this is nice to be part of. But I think we should also remember here that the panel, I mean, this is coming from a diversity panel, meaning it's not new genotypes we're testing, it's existing genotypes. So we are not coming out with some novel genotype that is better than anything else. We are testing existing genotypes. So what we hope will come out with is a better understanding of the traits that the breeders should use for future genotypes rather than coming out with the improved genotypes ourselves. So I think we should very much keep in mind who we are actually targeting for this work.
Farmers need to have that clear then.
Continuing, really, work package 5 is about comparing technologies or management technology to increase resilience of the system. So the goal is that the genotypes we use are able to show up the effectiveness of the technologies of the management. It's not comparing the genotypes themselves. They are really able to show up to increase the natural efficiency under certain technology. If the genotypes we use are not adapted there to the area, they're not going to work. They're not going to be able to show up the technology, which is the point of work package 5. So that's what I think we should really have the least one that can be promising in addition to development. To show up the different technologies, the management technologies we are working with. Work package 5 is not about testing genotypes from work package 2, at least the list that I understood from the way. It's really introducing the new technologies, or new, they're probably, they're not new, but well, some with certain degree of innovation, and see if these technologies, in combination with at least one of the new genotypes, increase resilience under the water and nutrient stress conditions.
It is about both. It's about the genotypes and
Yeah.
together, where we can get some additive benefits.
So you cannot only use champion genotypes. You cannot use only champion genotypes, because then if they are really well performing under this combined stress, maybe they are not going to show up the other management techniques that we are combining with the comparison of the genotypes. So
I don't know if I agree with that. I think, if you show that there's some genotypes that are already adapted without that additional agronomic innovation, that's useful. We don't set up experiments to prove things are different.
Then, as Christian was saying, we are not coming with new genotypes.
Yeah, that's
So
useful to know, because
maybe
it's not always
it
clear.
would work.
Because novel sounds new to me. Novel doesn't mean new, apparently.
But for on the genotype side, sorry, the novelty was more about the breeding strategies and not the genotypes, novel genotypes. except again for the hybrids, where it's a somehow new technology, and in the end, we can produce new material within 5 years. But the project is not just on hybrids, and therefore, in this project, we were aiming more on the breeding side to develop a number of novelties, but these are not coming up in the end within 5 years with novel material. So we have to keep this in mind. And when communicating with the farmers, that the aim of SOLAS was on this side as well. And so they are contributing to this, testing the material, but it's not possible to come up with in the end with brand new material that's going to be used heavily in their region. Pierre, you wanted to say something? Do you remember your TRL? It's indeed the OA, yeah.
No, we just said we would trial novel genotypes or hybrids and innovations on the farm. So it's my own misunderstanding of what a novel genotype was. So I guess you're suggesting it's existing genotypes that aren't currently commercially, they're not like widely commercially available or something.
Trying to remember from Montpellier. What I remember was novelty was from also novelty as an approach, as a concept. Like the idea was not really champion genotypes, but more increasing resilience. So I remember we discussed about genotypes that they translocate more carbon to the root system, so they have more powerful root system. So the potential yield was lower than maybe some other genotypes, but under stress conditions, they were able to maintain the productivity because they have a larger root system. So to me, the novelty is not, I mean, I don't mind if it wasn't important if the genotype was brand new, and just developed, or it was identified from a collection of genotypes from the 70s. The point was that there was a change or a novelty in the idea of not aiming to maximize the yield, but to increase resilience and maintaining yield by sacrificing some of the carbon that are translocated. I thought that was great. That's why I told to the farmers. They like it a lot. So I think, can we keep with this idea? And is that possible to identify genotype that is following this trait and try it? Let's see if it works.
And that's the aim of what we are doing in Work Package 2.
Yeah.